It is the voice of Indiana County. It's WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, and WCCSradio.com. And we're on the line this morning with Gary Sarnoff, and we're talking about his new book, Team of Destiny, Walter Johnson, Clark Griffith, Bucky Harris, and the 1924 Washington Senators. Our conversation is brought to you by Marcus & Mack, voted best personal injury law firm in the Best of Indiana County contest. Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. And I was talking and joking with Gary that I'd rather have written about the 1925 season because the Pirates won the World Series that year. But Gary, you're in 1924 with the Washington Senators, and what a wonderful ride it is.
Yeah, it sure was. What a season, a fantastic season, and this is the 100th anniversary, and it's great. Timing was great on the book.
Well, you mentioned the three principal players in this drama, Walter Johnson, Clark Griffith, and Bucky Harris, and they're all intriguing. We love to look at the guys that are in uniform, but we shouldn't give short shrift here to Clark Griffith because he's the guy that put it all together, and it started in the off season when I think Clark Griffith had an idea that he had a ball club, but he didn't have all the pieces in place just yet, and he made a pretty crucial decision, and that was hiring Bucky Harris as manager.
Yeah, and that was kind of a last-second decision as well. Spring training was coming up, and he didn't have a manager because he had terminated his manager from the previous season, and he wanted to get Eddie Collins, a Hall of Fame second baseman. He wanted to get him from the White Sox, but the White Sox didn't want to give him up, and Griffith didn't really want to give a lot for Eddie Collins, so that fell through, and he had a couple ideas that he couldn't swing a deal for. So he ended up at the last minute. He decided Bucky Harris. He figured he liked Bucky Harris. He knew Bucky Harris was a fighter, a good hard-nosed ball player, and he wanted Harris to manage his team someday. But someday turned into 1924 when Harris was only 27 years old.
And we get a really interesting look at baseball in the 1920s as well, because a player-manager is not only not common, it just doesn't happen anymore, but it wasn't all that uncommon back then. But at 27 years of age, most of these guys would be veterans playing out their careers, Ty Cobb being one of them, Collins, as you mentioned. But for Bucky Harris at the age of 27 to be named manager of this team, he was as shocked as anybody else.
Yeah, he was very surprised. He was not expecting that. He thought when he got a telegram telling him that he was going to manage the team, before he opened the telegram, he received the telegram, he thought this must be because I was traded. So getting the managing job was the last thing he had suspected. And at age 27, I mean, that was unheard of back then.
He starts to put the team together then, and he heads down to Florida. But in those days, not everybody went to Florida right off the bat. In fact, not everybody went to Florida. But he leaves his rookies there in Tampa at a hotel-type site that also has a baseball field there, and that sounds like a really interesting complex that they have there. And then trains off to Arkansas, where his veterans are.
Yeah, back in those days, the veterans used to go to Hot Springs, Arkansas, which was a resort town, of course, but it still is today. But they used to go there to prepare. That was their way to relax and to do some hiking, and that was their way to prepare for the strenuous spring training in the coming season. They thought they had to relax beforehand and kind of gradually get into shape for the start of the season.
One of the great things about your book is we meet Walter Johnson. That's one of the great things. Another is we get an idea for what it was like to be a baseball player back in that day. But Walter Johnson, we might know the nickname. Guys like me know the nickname, the Big Train. But the reputation that he had then as just this larger-than-life guy that can throw the ball 1,000 miles an hour, and he was coming off some poor seasons for him where he'd had some injury problems and concerns, but this was a really big rebound year for him, wasn't it?
It sure was, because he had injured his arm in 1920, and he had 4 mediocre seasons, and he was 36 years old. Everybody thought he was washed up, and he was at the tail end of his career, and he was going to retire after the 1924 season. And lo and behold, he wins 23 games, and he wins the American League MVP award. So that was an amazing comeback season for Walter Johnson.
They begin the season, and it's not the best of starts. The weather's kind of cool and wet in Washington, D.C. The personnel isn't exactly what Bucky Harris, they're not performing the way that he thought they might, and so they make a couple of trades. And they begin to warm up, though, just as the weather does, in the month of May, and then they really put some things together. What was it that turned this team around and made them start winning so quickly?
Well, a couple things. First of all, I think Harris, for starters, because Harris was a hard-nosed, fiery kind of player. So I think once his spirit was instilled into his ball players, I think that was a big factor, because everybody just kind of got the winning attitude, and to go out there and work hard every day. That was because of Harris. Of course, Walter Johnson's comeback season was a huge shot in the arm. So that was definitely a factor. And I think some of these players just coming to their prime, like Goose Goslin, who became a Hall of Famer, and some of the other players, those players entering their prime. And I think a great defensive infield as well. I think that's one of the best defensive infields in Major League Baseball history.
Yeah, and one of the great things about it is that as this team begins to heat up a little bit, and of course in baseball in the 1920s, your competition is going to be the Yankees and everything that they bring to the table, and the whole country knows the Yankees. This little underdog band from Washington, D.C. begins to gain some momentum and stand up a bit to the Yankees, and the country sort of adopted them. They embraced them.
Yeah, it was like one New York Times writer called them the people's team. Others have referred to them as America's team because, they were an underdog, and people were just tired of not only the Yankees but the Giants. I mean, they had won both the Giants and Yankees had won 3 consecutive pennants heading into the 1924 season, and they were expected to repeat as pennant winners in 1924. So people really wanted a change. They wanted to see somebody else, and what better team than an unexpected underdog?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we get to ride the train with the guys. Let's talk a little bit about what it was like to play baseball then. It's all basically east of the Mississippi, and you're going from city to city by train, and it really is something that we can't picture very well in this day and age, but we have this romantic image of it, and it's a pretty cool time.
Yeah, going by train wasn't very easy. First of all, no air conditioning, for starters, so no air conditioning. Number 2, just uncomfortable, just trying to sleep on a train. The beds were small, and the train shook a lot, so it was not the most comfortable trip. And during that season, late in the season, the Senators, they took a train trip from Chicago to Boston, and it was a 26-hour train trip.
Yeah.
So I mean, it wasn't like today, that's for sure.
No, but we get to follow the game, the season, game by game, and I think that's one of the really cool things about the way that you write the book. Is we go to the ballpark with you every single day.
Yeah, that's I wanted to write about the season, so I went game by game, series by series, team by team. So that was I wanted to give the feel of what it was like, what the season was like in 1924.
As you were following that season along, and we follow it along with you, talk about some of the resources that you were able to tap into and how you were able to pull this whole season together.
I went through the Washington newspapers day by day for the season, 4 different Washington newspapers, the Washington Post, the Washington Times, the Herald, and the Washington Evening Star. So I used those, but I did my research at the Library of Congress, and one of the beauties about the Library of Congress is you have almost every newspaper of every city on microfilm, dating way back to the 19th century. So if there was something I liked that I read in the Washington papers, I would think to myself, well, I wonder what the New York papers or Philadelphia papers, what do they say about this? What do they say about the series or about the shutout Walter Johnson pitched? So I thought that was a wonderful resource, and of course I also used a lot of books as well.
I thought one of the great things about reading your book, and again, we're talking this morning with Gary Sarnoff, the author of the book Team of Destiny, Walter Johnson, Clark Griffith, Bucky Harris, and the 1924 Washington Senators. You, in a way, adopt some of the writing style, the language patterns that were used by the newspaper writers of that day. It becomes a part of the way that you tell this story. And I thought that was a great technique by you.
Well, thank you very much. I had a friend, he wrote a book, and one of the things he said is when he had to decide if he was going to write it himself or take a quote from one of the writers from the Times, he said, I figure they could write it better than I could. So that was something that I kept in mind.
Yeah, and it's a great mechanism that you use for this, and it makes a wonderful, wonderful read. We could go on for a long, long time, Gary, but we need to move along here this morning on Indiana in the Morning. The book is Team of Destiny, Walter Johnson, Clark Griffith, Bucky Harris, the 1924 Washington Senators. Where are we going to get our hands on this thing?
Well, you could buy from my publisher, Roman in Littlefield, or a lot of my friends are just going directly to Amazon.
Yeah, well,
there's a couple other resources as well.
Terrific way to do it. You getting all excited about spring training?
I sure am. I'm looking forward now. Since the football season is over, I'm looking forward to baseball starting up. So, yes, for sure. I've got I'm in season tickets with some friends. So we're about to have our draft for the coming season. So I'm excited.
Big Nats man?
Yes, I am. Go Nats.
Well, we've had some real battles with the Nats over the years with our Pirates, even though we're not in the same division. That's been a nice little rivalry that has formed.
Yeah, it's close. The cities are relatively close, and the other thing, there's a lot of Pirates fans in Northern Virginia. That's because all the years, 33 years of Washington not having Major League Baseball, people look to adopt a different team, and a lot of people in Northern Virginia adopted the Pirates.
I love going to D.C. D.C. is my favorite city to visit. And on a Nats day game day, when you're on the Metro, it doesn't matter where you are, the travel situation there, that the Metro picks you up and takes you right to the stadium. What a great setup that is.
Yeah, it sure is. It works. I use the Metro whenever I go to a sporting event in Washington, D.C., whether it's the Nationals or the Wizards. I always take the Metro, so yeah, it's the best way to travel. It's great. It
really is a great way to go to a ball game, and if you ever get the chance, you're in D.C., you can go to a Nats game, watch the Presidents do the race.
That's right.
It's good stuff. Well, Gary Sarnoff, it's been fun talking here this morning. Talking ball is always a good time, especially at the start of spring training.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, too.
It is the voice of Indiana County. It's WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, and WCCSradio.com.